You ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Recording's on. So, you, of course, are a student at Cardiff University. What are you studying, and what previous experience do you have that makes you the most suitable option for the role?
So I'm studying international relations. I'm really enjoying it. I only knew IR was a degree because there was a display at my sixth form college that said you could do international relations, and I was like, you can study that? Obviously applied everywhere for it, ended up in Cardiff, was really happy to end up in Cardiff, not just because our rent compared to some places is pretty decent. It's a really enjoyable degree. I'd recommend it if anyone's looking to transfer. In terms of experience, I currently run the Model United Nations Society, where again, it's basically a lot of IR stuff, shocker. I'm also a student rep. I've just come straight from the student staff panel where I was debating with lecturers about stuff they really don't want to change, but we really think they should change. I'm sure there'll be a lot of people who really don't like 2-hour online exams. I saw my housemates cry. I've got a lot of political activism in my past, a lot of campaigning, that kind of things, debating skills, obviously from MUN, and then I did a lot of mock trials and stuff, which I think will really help me. In the past, I've held a lot of similar roles. I was on my college executive, school council, all the kind of nerdy stuff that tried to make change and sometimes did it.
Brill. Where did you grow up? What kind of school did you go to? And could you give us a bit of info about kind of your childhood and teen years?
I'm from a state school on the Somerset and Devon border. Under 50% of students at my school would pass maths and English. Ours was actually a record high for maths with 42% passing. So that kind of gives the background. I'm dyslexic as well, so it was definitely a challenge in terms of support and stuff with that. I failed GCSEs. I didn't pass all my GCSEs, and I think my experience of dealing with, we were basically a school of farmers, people who might have a lot going on at home, and then some other random kids, and it was a very weird dynamic, but it's definitely shaped my view on how people are treated. The 2 head of department detentions I ever got were basically arguing because they were being nasty to my friends. It's kind of a theme through my life of getting over involved where I probably don't need to. But I guess hopefully it's going to work out for this.
When you think about your life outside of university and outside of this campaign, what does that kind of look like for you? What does your free time look like?
I'm really busy at the moment. So my diary is literally page to page with things. I run a lot. It's such a good way to de-stress. If anyone sees someone screaming Paper Rings by Taylor Swift as they run around Cathays, it's probably me. My bad, I know the singing's not great. I also play a bit of football, especially at home. I love football, although I'm absolutely terrible at it. I'm pretty engaged with that on the sports kind of thing. And then in terms of my social life, I've got some amazing friends, and some not so great ones, but try and be there for everyone.
Keeping on that same theme, do you have a favourite social event in Cardiff, whether it's a pub, club, society or anything else?
I used to be such a Misfits guy. The Misfits bucket, shout out. However, the digital queue is probably the biggest shocker ever. I've become such a silent disco convert for when YOLO has a full building. That silent disco is amazing. Until they get the foam cannon out, then that's what you're doing.
Okay, getting on to some more specifics around the campaign. You're a second-year student opting to take a sabbatical year if you're successful. Is this a experience that might be a weakness for you against your candidates?
I think it's actually my biggest strength. I think the other candidates, especially in this election, 2 of them will, by the time they finish this role, have been graduated for 2 years. As far as I'm not concerned, you're not a student at that point. For me, somebody representing students should be a student, and also the consequences of my actions will affect me and my friends. You know, like I'm gonna go home from every day, and if I haven't made a statement on timetables being late, or I haven't made a statement on stuff that Time to Act is working on, there's not gonna be a big post, there's gonna be my housemate hitting me, probably. Because the reality is that scrutiny is always gonna be around me, and anything I fail to implement the next year when I come back, I'm gonna have to sit at the front of a lecture as I usually do. Yes, I'm a big nerd. and have 500 people looking at my ginger head and hating me if I don't do a good enough job. I think genuinely it's probably my biggest strength, having as much on the line as other people and being connected to those other people. I think my whole personal belief, I will not be running for a second term. I think this is a one-time job where we try and steer the ship and make things better. Then I get back to uni and get on with my life, essentially.
Your manifesto is certainly the most in-depth Gair Rhydd has seen this year. Can you explain a bit about what you've done to work with this, what your core message is, and why you took the approach that you have?
So we also have probably the biggest campaign team. So we have a first-year representative, a second-year representative, a third-year representative, a women's and minority representative, then we have campaign manager, social media manager, and then we have 2 translators. And essentially, the main role of all of these people has been bring your expertise, bring your friends' expertise. We have some friends who are med students, and we've been talking to them about what's actually going on at Heath and how they actually feel, because I've been there a few times, I've been to a couple of events there, but actually I'm never going to be able to know as much as them. I think my biggest strength is being able to ask other people and engage with other people, because the idea that I would know exactly what a postgrad wants is just ridiculous. And that's why we've ended up with such a long manifesto, because we've allowed everyone to have their feedback, but we hope that reflects kind of what I would do if I did get this role, and actually acting like we're doing it from the off.
Brilliant. Safety is listed as your first priority in your manifesto. You speak about safety zones for students with support in services like the Cardiff University Safe Zone app. How do you plan to get some of this across the line when some of this can include going onto city streets, with much of the plan covering areas up to, you mentioned, Circuit?
Yeah, so the Safe Zone app, for anyone who doesn't know the context, is something that is used by Exeter University on their campus to keep students safe. You basically make a green zone on the floor, it's just like a green painted circle, and then you're able to, as you're walking home, if you feel unsafe at any point, be that any type of threat, essentially, or any type of illness. We know we have a lot of ill students and stuff like that. You're able to then alert from the zone to get support. The big part is obviously working with people. We know that all these figures have come out about how unsafe CUTV is. That's bad for the council, that's bad for the police, that's bad for the university, and that's bad for the union. There are 4, income sources essentially to this scheme, which will help the scheme actually work. And I'm very, very, very happy to step on toes and get angry. I think, any council, union, university, or police force that's against students being safe walking home is ridiculous, and it should really be addressed. Essentially, with safety, obviously everyone will have had horrible experiences, or will have known of people who have horrible experiences. And our biggest thing is just making sure that we can do a little thing to stop that. So these cameras, to keep the zone safe, would be placed on union and university buildings initially, which we could literally do. We could get, right now, you could go out and put 3 cameras and a bit of green paint on the floor and track a zone from Circuit to Tally, linking St Ganeth and linking to Column Hall and Aberconway. We could literally do it, and there's no reason for them not to do it. The other thing in terms of that is obviously we have to focus on education and all the other things that will help us reduce these kind of activities. But I think that's something we could literally do, hopefully, for freshers.
Your approach is quite surveillance-led. And what evidence do you have that those sorts of schemes will bring tangible results for students?
I think in terms of surveillance-led, the surveillance is the initial contact. One of the hardest things anyone will have found if you've tried to call an ambulance at university, if you've tried to call the police. I know I work downstairs in the co-op and we just get robbed and threatened with needles, and you'll get a police officer in 2 hours. Well, in 2 hours I could have 3 needle holes in me. Ideally not, obviously. And essentially having that first bit of contact where the union already has 24-hour security camera monitoring, so we're not bringing in any extra cost in terms of that. You basically have someone in the union who you're making contact with. The uni already has security patrols for campus who are going around anyway, so you can get them out to you. So it's definitely led by surveillance, but I think the surveillance is part of making a scheme that actually works.
You speak about that increased support from the union and the visibility of it for students, and you specifically talk about housing. Is this you saying that you believe the housing campaign that the current SU president, Maria Pollard, your competitor, has brought in this year isn't good enough?
I think the housing campaign has brought a lot of eyes to the attention of housing, and I know a lot of people have benefited from the fairs. But people are still going on Facebook to find housemates. That's still the first method everyone turns to, unfortunately. Our approach to housing would also be more direct. I think a lot of issues that people are having with housing, obviously finding housemates and stuff can be a real struggle, but one of the main issues that I'm sure everyone's witnessed is dealing with a really nasty landlord. I have friends, let's say, who they gaslight the hell out of you and manipulate you and threaten legal action and do all these things to try and keep you down. I feel like everyone listening has probably had an experience where a second year or a third year has been telling a fresher, don't go with this company, don't go with that company. And one of the schemes we'd be interested in bringing in is a ranking system so that you can rank. It would be anonymously ranked, but you'd have to provide proof that you've actually used that agency. And then you can rank, I dealt with blah, blah, blah company and I ranked them 3 out of 10 because they wouldn't fix this. They never did this. They never cared about us. Because everyone should have access to that information. And going to a fair and finding housemates is great, but then if you end up living somewhere where actually every day is stress and every day you're getting mold poisoning, that's unacceptable.
You then go on to speak very rightly about freedom of speech on campus, saying you will stand up for it and use the union's power to advocate for it. How?
I think a big issue we've had was the injunction. I personally read through the injunction, and the way it was essentially done was saying that they were having more cost because of security. The union the university using these measures against students is something where the union needs to step in. We can't have lukewarm statements. We need to have a real fight. And I think there's also a link with student media, of our student media needs to be protected. One of the things we're looking towards now is obviously you guys have a council regulating you and the bylaws aren't always updated. And that's something I'd really look to engage with, because the freedom of speech on campus is the first thing a union should be advocating for, because we need to point out issues.
As you go on to say, you describe the restrictions of student media as terrifying. What work, including the bylaws stuff, do you plan to take to ensure that that's no longer possible? And are you open to those discussions being led by Gair Rhydd and other student media bodies?
I think I've shown with my manifesto that my main priority is always to go to the people who understand the issue best. And obviously, that is going to be our student media bodies. I think having a conversation about someone when they're not in the room is, firstly, excuse the French, bitchy. And secondly, is just pointless. You're not going to develop anything. I think having student media involved in making a system that is fit for purpose for student media is what we should be doing. And I think the rumours of the union kind of being nasty to the student media groups is abhorrent. This is a students' union, and the biggest weapon of the students' union to fight injustice should be the student media.
And with that, are you open to ideas of complete editorial independence?
I think I understand sometimes the overview comes from a legal perspective, but we need to have a conversation about whether it's coming from a legal perspective or it's coming from the union being scared to step on the uni's toes. I think the union's perspective that they can't step on the uni's toes when the uni's communication with them is so lax around so many things is like, you're already in the doghouse. Why are you worried about it raining?
You speak about mental health and some of the failing supports, saying that we should take things like the All Right Mate campaign as something to be very proud of. What does this mean for you? What's going to happen?
Firstly, to just explain the All Right Mate campaign, because so many engaged students won't know about it, which is firstly abhorrent. The All Right Mate campaign basically just encourages you to check in on your friends. I'm sure we've all had personal experiences where your housemate or one of your course friends just saying, "You're all right," makes such a difference. And you have a little cry to them and you go to the library after your lecture and suddenly you feel so much better about everything. Usually there's also a coffee involved, I feel like. And those kind of schemes have really good basis, but nobody knows about them. And I think that's the saddest part.
Your manifesto repeatedly stresses that you won't make empty or unrealistic promises. How will students be able to measure your success throughout your term if you're successful?
I think it's really important that students know, firstly, what we're standing for. So we'll keep that publicised. I think the weekly updates that some of the sabbatical officers have been doing are good. I think students need to know exactly what their SABs are working on. I also think I've seen a lot of talk about like a tracker and stuff like that. I think that's a good way of measuring it. However, I think the best way of measuring it will be hopefully next year when you can see green paint on the streets and CCTV cameras that indicate that you are safe to walk home.
Several of your proposals rely on collaborations with bodies like the university, council, police and other external partners. What do you plan to do if this cooperation doesn't go to plan? What's the plan B?
I think the plan B is to fight. And I think that's something a union should do. A union in general, not just a students' union. And students' unions have such good history of fighting. And sometimes fight dirty. Essentially, like, especially on like the safe zones thing, if the police are against the safe zones thing, that's a thing that the media should know. That's a thing that the taxpayers should know. That's a thing that everyone who is affected by these authorities should know about. I think this is a political role, and students use it in a political way, but part of having political capital is using the political capital. There's no point building political capital to just let it sit there.
You describe accessibilities across the university experience, and given you say you will not rerun for a second term if you're successful, how can students trust that improvements will occur in a single term?
I think accessibilities is definitely a long process. We could definitely look at an AGM motion, which is something we'd be looking to for the safe acts as well, the safe zone, sorry, to continue the work. I have a lot on the line. I'm a dyslexic student. I had a massive fight with the uni today in student staff panel about accessibility, and one of the things we were talking about is putting links to accessibility resources on your Learning Central tab, so you can actually access it and know that you have that opportunity and you have that support. In my first exam at the university, I didn't apply for the right conditions quickly enough, so it directly impacted me. And I think if this is to happen to students, this is absolutely heartbreaking. I also have family members who have accessibility needs, so it's such a priority for me that I'm not just saying this performatively, we are going to try and make real change.
I just wanted to, I hope you don't mind, Marie.
Come closer to the mic.
I just wanted to pick up a little bit about the physical disability side of things, because myself, I have family members who are physically disabled. I just wondered, I noticed in your manifesto you said that it is unacceptable that certain buildings are not accessible at all. What would you do to make a change? Because, for example, in this building, if a lift is out, someone might need to wait, someone that's a wheelchair user or it has, struggles physically, they might have to wait like 10-15 minutes before the lift.
And even worse than that sometimes, right? Like we all saw the things of the people being rescued by the fire brigade from the external lift last year. And I think in terms of accessibility, they have spent, I know there's reports in the paper recently about how much they've been spending on hubs and stuff like that. The university is telling you that they don't have the money to do things on accessibility. That's what they're telling everyone. And then they're spending it on other things. I think there's a choice of what you prioritize, and there's simple changes that are low cost that can make such a difference. One of them mentioned like signs to lifts. Trying to find a lift in a university building is half of the problem. Yes. Hoping that the lift works, as you said, is the second part of the problem. And then, being able to use it is then the third part of the problem. And I think these can really be addressed. And I think the university would probably be quite eager to address these things when they're pointed out. One of the big things that came up during our consultation was students talking about a lot of buildings will have a disabled toilet on the ground floor and nowhere else.
Yes, yeah.
Well, lifts have been a thing since, I don't know, a very long time. Disabled students are now able to access all floors of the building, we hope, if the lifts are working. And essentially it's just heartbreaking that you want to pop out in the 10-minute break that you have in a 2-hour lecture to go to the toilet, but you can't do that because you have to go down 5 floors and go to that lift, which is ridiculously far away.
Yeah, thank Thank you. And another, sorry.
Yeah.
Something I've been looking into recently is the accessibility of the station. I'm not sure if you're aware, but even if you've got a little limp, that station is completely inaccessible. The plans, the money, the funding, it's all there. It just needs someone to push it through. Would you be happy to be that voice?
100%. And I think, firstly, contact me about it, and let's talk about the manifesto and let's get stuff in there. Secondly, CUTV station didn't used to have ticket barriers. They've changed the station to put ticket barriers in, but they haven't changed it to make it accessible. And those kind of priorities are just sad.
Yeah.
This is the most convenient station, especially, I'm sure people in the room are Jomex students, getting between campuses and things like that. It just shouldn't be a barrier. It really shouldn't be a barrier, and it's embarrassing that it's a barrier that the university's ignored for so long.
I think it's been like 20 years.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Comfortable?
Yes. Sorry, that's the most important thing.
Yeah. She was a very big voice in how we phrased the accessibility stuff. You described the decision to remove the VP Heath Park role as concerning and a failure of the simple things like the Heath Park campus website as basic errors, saying that representatives of Heath ought to be paid and that Heath students' voices may not have been sufficiently heard. How do you feel the current SAB's approach was insufficient, and how do you suggest addressing it?
Well, firstly, the current SAB posted on his story yesterday, or their story, yesterday, saying that they're going to take a 2-week, their fortnightly updates will have a break for elections. Their role is to do the role and not focus on the elections. I'm still going to lectures. They should still be doing their role. Essentially on that, I think the approach in general, this was an AGM that was held in CUTV at 6 p.m. on a Wednesday. Anyone who lives with or is friends with students who are on placement knows that that is just not feasible for them to get to. There was no online access for them to vote. Furthermore, the 3 motions of the AGM were widely publicised. However, because this was an internal structural change, it wasn't widely publicised. The majority of Heath students didn't know this was changing. So they didn't know it was going to change. They probably couldn't get there. And if they got there, then in many cases, they were outvoted by students who are from the CUTV's campus who know nothing about the Heath.
And just to finish on the last question, so you can breathe now. What makes you the best candidate? Why are you the best candidate for students?
I think having so much on the line really makes a difference. I think, there's no way that I'm going to be able to, I'm ginger, there's no way I'm going to be able to walk through the street and someone not say, oh, what have you done on this? I think the visibility of an SU president is so important to making them good at the role. And I think, a third of students will probably vote in this election. And that's something we're really going to try and change. We want as many people represented as possible. We want as many people to consult on our manifesto as possible, to make as much change as possible that actually suits and works. And I think that links back to my ability to listen to people's approaches on things and to try and help develop and facilitate ideas. Basically having something on the line, being able to listen to people, having the accountability there, staring me in the face, calling me an idiot, I hope not, will make a real difference. I think having had so many of these experiences and having friends who have those experiences, like working while I'm at university, stuff like that, is really conducive to how I view the student experience. And I think hopefully that makes me a candidate that people will consider. Even if you don't want to put me as your first choice, I'd really appreciate being on your ballot at all. And I just think everyone should vote, whether it's for me or another candidate. Read the manifestos, see what you think, contact the candidates, put some effort in. It's really horrible too, but you're going to get the £5 voucher at the end. It all pays off.
Brilliant. That's that.